Hello, my name is William Maz. I'm the author of two novels, The Bucharest Dossier and The Bucharest Legacy. And I'm also a physician. And I'm here today to have a chat with a new author who is also a physician and an entrepreneur and all sorts of other things. And now he is a writer. His name is Mark Rosenberg, and he just came out with a new book, Curing Death. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Bill.
So, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the book and how you came up with the topic that you wrote about.
Okay, so I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. I went to University of Pennsylvania undergrad and Georgetown Med School, and I did my residency in emergency medicine, and I ran several emergency departments, Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and then a couple of emergency departments in South Florida. I taught residents, and I was always interested in the aging process. My training was in a trauma center, and I saw a fair amount of people die in my career. And I always, when I was in high school and even middle school, I liked to write science fiction, but I never took it seriously because I was more interested in medicine, at a young age. And so in 2000 is when I first started writing this. I had just left my first wife, and I had some time to contemplate, and some crazy idea came into my head about writing this crazy science fiction novel. And I ended up over several days writing the synopsis. It was way too long of a synopsis. It actually was about 40 pages. And it's been sitting on my computer for over 20 years. And about 2 years ago, I was going through my old files, and I looked at it and said, wow, this is still, even today, this is cool. I got to finish this off. And that's what I did. I finished it off.
Well, that's a very interesting subject. You're dealing with a topic that, in America, we don't really discuss very much. Death is treated, unlike in previous times and maybe other societies, it's treated as something we don't want to observe. We put it away. People die in sterile environments. And family members, grandma, grandpa doesn't live in the house anymore, so they don't die in bed. So I'm wondering, is part of your, I know you wrote it to entertain, as you say in your preface, but I think part of it is also obviously a topic that, I think needs to be discussed in this country, as how we treat death. And in medical school, I never learned anything about treating death. How do we teach students and society about looking at death?
Sure. I'm going to tell you that a good part of my life, I was either an agnostic or atheist. And I have learned a lot personally through, watching people who had near-death experiences. And then, of course, I've read books that, like by Dr. Jeffrey Long, who has interviewed over 5,000 individuals with near-death experiences. Sam Parnia from Stony Brook, who runs an emergency department and has witnessed a lot of near-death experiences. And a book called Return to Life by Jim Tucker, where these cases are documented where children between 2 and 6 years of age have complete recollection of another life that existed way before they were born. And this is all published scientific data. And it has changed my feeling. And I have to say feeling because, that's all I have. But I absolutely believe that life goes on at this point, that life goes on when our body dies. And whether you believe in like Robert Lanza, a very famous scientist, believes that there's a multiverse and that, we exist in another dimension. But I absolutely believe that life goes on. And so although this is all science fiction, what science fiction today may not be science fiction 20 years from now.
So how do you propose we teach medical students? That was another part of my question about that.
That's so, how do we teach medical students? I think, I think we need to, this is science that needs to come into medical school, which we don't do. And the truth is, I don't call what we do in the United States as healthcare. I call it sick care in our country. In other countries, they practice healthcare. They try to prevent disease. Right. We don't do that in this country. But I think if you had a formal course for medical students where we bring up the data that I just talked about by Sam Parnia, by Jeffrey Long, by Jim Tucker, it will open up their eyes to realize that, this life may not be the end. And I think when you take that perspective, as a medical student that becomes a doctor, you can impart some of that information on your patients, and it can help the patients perhaps be more at peace with their impending death, as I am now. I mean, I'll be 64 years old, July 17th. And
you look like you're 30, for Christ's sakes. How do you do it?
I've been practicing, my research is cancer and aging. And I've been practicing calorie restriction since medical school. Wow. And because I want to live forever. Well, now I feel differently. I don't want to live in this body forever, and I'm not going to live in this body forever, but I am no longer afraid of death of this body, because I absolutely know it's not the end.
Well, I've been thinking about the topic since I was 5, and I had a prayer. Yes. So some of my relatives died, and I was asking my mother what death is. And then I got very scared because she kept giving me these stories about going with God and living in the clouds. I didn't want to live in the clouds. So my prayer was simple. I didn't trust that God even existed. So my prayer was, please, God, please exist. The logic of it, the false logic of it was evident to me even then, right? How could I be praying to a God that doesn't exist to exist? But I was involved in all sorts of, research and other things about near-death experiences and life after death. One thing you can do in medical school is there are a lot of people around who've had them. They're afraid to talk about it. You can bring them in and interview them. I've had patients who have told me what went on in the operating room in a previous operation they had, observing surgeons pump on their chest and all of that. And these people are out there. But anyway, let's talk about your book. You could have taken all sorts of tacks on the subject. I mean, we could talk about aging as a DNA issue. Aging is encrypted in our DNA. Every species has its own lifespan. Obviously, we are made to die at some point because evolution wouldn't work otherwise. But instead, you could have gone the path of finding the DNA cure for aging, right? Or you could have gone down, but you chose to go down a spiritual path of finding the soul and measuring its weight. Now, that's an old topic that I remember from way back, from like the turn of 20th century, about a guy who talked about weighing the soul. So tell me about that decision as to how to talk about the subject, how you chose.
Well, I think, I've been contemplating the existence of the soul, or some energy that is imparted that makes us us. And I've been, since my youth, I've thought about that. And now the truth is, what do I think? I think that the soul leaves when the body is no longer viable, as opposed to in the book, the soul leaving is what caused the body to die. But it was certainly a better story if I can say, wow, if I can keep the soul, the individual won't die. But I think I went down that path because I had been struggling a lot of my life with the scientific side, and the belief in the soul. But now, the reason I finally brought that to light is now we have all these publications on, people with near-death experiences and children who remember a complete past life, that I felt like, okay, there is data behind the soul. And I said, you know what? I've got to take that concept and go on a scientific ride. And if I can share this with you, so I ended up becoming a cancer scientist as well. And I just want to let everybody know this. The way my brain or my mind or whatever thought about this crazy story is honestly the same type of thinking I use to, my team and I developed a filter to eliminate circulating tumor clusters from the bloodstream. It's really the same type crazy thinking where I just sit there. I've been meditating, by the way, since I was 16. I do TM every morning.
So do I.
Excellent. So I just let my mind go to crazy places. And I think I did the same thing writing this novel.
Yeah.
That I do with trying to figure out a solution for cancer.
So a technical question from one novelist to another. You write in the present tense. How did you choose the present tense rather than the past, which is what most writers do?
Yeah. How did I choose? I think it was a traumatic time in my life because I was just leaving my wife and I had a child, and it was a traumatic time in my life, and I was living through this trauma. And I think that was what spurred me to say, I'm going to go through this now in this novel, not before, not
Right.
the future, because I'm living it.
Got it. Have you thought about, well, to me, I don't know what's scarier, oblivion, non-existence, or eternal existence with no way out. Both are terrifying, right? And you got New Agers who tell me, well, you're in this body in order to learn something. And my question is, really, is our soul eternal? Oh, yes. Well, do you know what eternal means? It means the soul has existed for an infinite amount of time. It has had an infinite number of experiences, an infinite number of times. Why do we still need to come to Earth to learn something? We should know everything by now. Which, obviously we can't answer these questions, but every time somebody comes up with something of why there is a soul and what we're doing here, there are 10 other questions that open up.
Sure.
So, I don't know what your private thinking about that is, but let's go on. There is a movie called Flatliners. I mean, you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
So, that brings up the whole topic of research. Medicine hasn't done any research on death, or if there is an afterlife, or if people can actually, see something when they have spontaneous out-of-body experiences, which my sister-in-law has had all her life, ever since she almost died of an anaphylactic shock. And so, and she could tell me what I'm doing at any particular time if she happens to be hovering where I am. So you can test it. You can actually do tests and do research. Or you can do what the Flatliners did and kill somebody under controlled conditions and then bring them back and say, what have you seen? So where do you think science should go with this kind of research?
Well, I think, one of our big impediments to making this happen is, of course, big pharma. So there's no financial incentive to do it. But, again, like we talked about, there's real data behind this. Now, of course, I'd love to see, real controlled studies like you were mentioning. But there's enough data to pull in, that we can present. And Sam Parnia is actually, he wrote a book, not Escaping Death, but anyway, yeah, Sam Parnia, anyway, at Stony Brook, he is evaluating people with near-death experiences. So one of the things that he's done is in the trauma room or the emergency room, he's putting signs that can only be seen from the ceiling. So he's actually doing so studies like that. For example, in his book, he talks about that. I think it was a woman who had a near-death experience. She was, no brain activity, no heart activity, and when she came back, she said she floated to another room where one of her relatives was on the phone, and she can tell everything that relative said.
Yeah.
And so Sam Parnia, I think, is really doing the most cutting edge work into bringing this to science.
That's very interesting. Maybe you should switch from cancer to doing something like that if you have the passion for it. How did you learn to write? Your writing is beautiful, by the way. It is. It draws me in. The scenes that you've set up, the dialogue. Did you take writing classes? Or
No. And I was told, I mean, I think this is something that was innate. I mean, when I was in high school, I wrote short stories, and people said, you need to be a writer. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. And I think one of the most, what I love about what I did with the book was jumping from my research to the emergency department traumas that were going on. And by the way, or crises, I need to let the public know that every one of those crazy emergency department visits were real. Yeah. Now, I may have taken a little poetic license to make it a little more interesting, but they're all based on real events. And I thought, as I was dreaming this up, I thought, how cool would it be to just go back and forth and back and forth? So I really, again, I don't have any formal training, but I think, maybe in my old age, I would love to do this for a living. I could write, like I already have, sequel in mind. I started writing notes, but I think this is a gift that I didn't really know that I had. I'm sure I could benefit from formal training in writing, but I had a blast writing it.
So you mentioned the sequel. I was going to ask you, what's next? Are the same characters involved, or?
So I don't want to. Is it okay to spoil it for the audience?
No, you don't want to spoil it.
So some of the main characters, like the lead character, is still going to be there. Remember, the soul goes on, so there's a possibility.
You're going to blow it now. Okay. So there's all sorts of possibilities.
Yes, many possibilities. And I have many different scenarios that I've put down on my iPhone.
And probably a lot of those things may end up being true in real life. So tell us, we're going to have to end pretty soon. Tell us where we can find your book, if you have a website, and
Sure.
You're going to appear anywhere else.
Okay, so my website is markrosenbergmd.com. It's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. As far as appearing elsewhere, that's in the works. That is to be determined.
Well, I've read the book from cover to cover. I loved it. I read it in 2 days, and I congratulate you on a beautiful book. And it can only go better from here for you. Maybe we see a movie in the making. Who the hell knows, right?
I would be very excited to make this into a movie, and I think it may be even better in a series,
Yeah.
like a Netflix series, because there's just so much going on. I don't know if it'd be too hard to condense this all into a movie. I don't know.
Yeah. Once you sell your rights, you have absolutely no control over anything. So that's the problem.
Yeah.
They could make a cowboy movie out of it.
Great.
All right. That's it for me. If you have anything else to add, Mark, otherwise, it's been a beautiful conversation, and I look forward to your next book.
Thank you, Bill. And it means a lot coming from you, because I know you certainly have a lot of talent, and you've demonstrated that in your work. So thank you. Nothing else to add on my part right now.
Okay. Goodbye, folks. It was a pleasure being with you.
Thank you.